Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining today. My name is Lindsay Hillcoat, and I'm from Seed Global Education, and I'm really excited to have you in today's session. So I know many of you are just joining us. I can see that number ticking up. What I'm going to ask you to do as you're joining in is the chat is enabled, and I'd love for you to introduce what city and country you're joining from today. Hello from Toronto, Canada. That's where I'm joining from. And you can see in the chat, hopefully you can say hello. Let us know where you're dialing in from. Okay, we've got our host here from Washington, D.C. Okay, great. Got Delhi, a couple of people from Delhi, Punjab, Goa. Fantastic. Lots of people here from India. I see Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bihar. Oh, we've got someone joining in. Hello, Ishat from Lagos, Nigeria. But another country, Pakistan. Fantastic. So keep that flowing. See a few more people joining us. Oh, Accra, Ghana. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to get started. Once again, my name is Lindsay, and I'm from Seed Global Education, where we facilitate interactions between top universities, like our masterclass host today, George Washington University, the Elliott School of International Affairs, and top students like yourselves. And today we're going to have a great session on something very topical. We were just chatting about the weather today a little bit before we got started, and that's how do we change what's possible? Global efforts to combat climate change, where we'll be learning about innovative solutions and collective action for a sustainable future. And after the masterclass, more information will be shared about the Elliott School of International Affairs, including admissions information, should you be interested in joining one of their programs. Please note that we'll be enabling Q&A function throughout the session. So we'll be disabling the chat, but you can put any of your questions in the Q&A and we will be answering them live at the end as well. So if you have any questions about the session or perhaps more about the Elliott School, please use the Q&A function to ask us your questions. So before I introduce our speakers today, I'm going to launch a poll, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about from you as we launch into our session. So I'm going to be launching the poll, and you can go ahead and answer what you think is the right answer to the question, which factor do you think most influences whether companies support or resist environmental regulation? So go ahead and jump in there. Okay, we've got lots of answers pouring in. People are a little divided. All right, I'll give you another 10 seconds. And I'll close the poll. Okay, so the number one answer for which factor you think most influences whether companies support or resist environmental regulation is the cost of compliance. So 38% of you answered the cost of compliance, and tied for second was the availability of new technology and government incentives or penalties. So great to hear, and I'm sure we'll learn more from Dr. Kelsey today, what she believes or what does influence the support or resistance of environmental regulation. So we'll share those results with you here. Okay. And I am going to launch a second poll as well. So on our second poll, oh, my apologies. Just going to go to the second question. I'm going to ask you, what skill do you think is most important for future international leaders? So how can you prepare to lead in this space? So global awareness and cultural understanding, policy analysis and problem solving, communication and negotiation, ethical decision making. Got 4 choices there. Maybe all of them are important in your mind, but what do you think is the most critical for future international leaders? But definitely 2 that are above the rest for all of you. I'd love to see. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in about 10 seconds. I'll share our results with you. So the majority of you selected global awareness and cultural understanding, followed by policy analysis and problem solving. So definitely a consensus here on what you think is the most important. Great. Okay. So from there, I'm delighted to introduce our guests, Dr. Nina Kelsey, who's the Associate Professor of Public Policy and International Affairs, and Danielle Goldstein, the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions, both of whom are from the Elliott School of International Affairs. And we'll be beginning off with Dr. Kelsey, whose research examines the role of interest in environmental policy making and negotiation, and will be leading today's session. Over to you, Dr. Kelsey.
Always forget to turn off that mute. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that great introduction. I thought the answers to the polls were really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the responses and questions that you all have as soon as we get the me talking at you part of this over with. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So I'm going to be talking about this topic of how we change what's possible. And I'm framing that around global efforts to combat climate change. But I know that that's kind of a fraught topic right now, a difficult topic. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I do want to just say a hello and thank you from me for taking the time to be here. I am the program director of the Masters in International Science and Technology Policy here at the Elliott School. My personal specialty is energy and climate policy, but we have other experts at the master's program and the Institute for International Science and Technology Policy, which supports it. Who focus on things like innovation policy, space policy, and lots of other interesting things. I would like to invite you, if you would like any more information, either about what I'm going to talk about today or the program, to send me an email at my name, Nina Kelsey, at gwu.edu, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. But I just wanted to make it clear that I'd love to hear from anyone. So, one thing I think you can't approach this topic with right now is you can't do that without asking what is sort of the global stance on mitigating climate change. I think that with the US's real withdrawal from that space, not to say that in any way global action has ever relied entirely on what the US thinks we should do. There's a lot of other centers of policy drivers out there. But certainly the US's pulling out of the international aid space, I know, has really changed how a lot of countries, particularly developing countries, are thinking about this. I was just in South Africa a couple of months ago, and they were talking about how they're trying to do many of the same things that they've always been doing. But they are certainly at least reframing how they talk about them. And they are thinking hard about how they can make sure that policies to do climate mitigation as well as adaptation are really embedded in their policy structures to ensure that they will survive the ups and downs of local and global politics. So I wanted to talk about this topic in that context. And I want to start out by taking a little bit of a detour. In 2022, so about 3 years ago now, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol was ratified. And that is already an interesting thing because it's getting harder and harder to get global environmental treaties ratified. And what's really interesting is that the US actually joined in on this environmental treaty ratification, which is almost unheard of in this day and age. And that traces back to something a couple of years before the formal ratification of the Kigali Amendment, although uh, during the period where that amendment was on the table waiting to be ratified. And that is the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, which was passed by the US Congress in December of 2020. And that is an act that did a number of things, but in particular, what it did was give the US government authority to regulate uh, HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, a chemical which previously the Montreal Protocol had created a big market for because they were the substitutes that we made for chlorofluorocarbons, the original ozone-depleting substances. So a lot of technical detail here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But the bottom line here is that the US Congress passed an act controlling these chemicals, which then supported the ability to ratify the Kigali Amendment, which was an international treaty also controlling these HFC chemicals. And that was not only passed through Congress, which is very unusual. Congress right now in the United States is very unlikely to, well, do much of anything in some ways, but also certainly to pass environmental treaties. And moreover, it was a bipartisan act. So it was co-sponsored by a Democratic senator from Delaware and a Republican senator from Louisiana. And so this is really interesting, I think. Efforts to reduce ozone depletion, the problem of the loss of the ozone layer in the atmosphere, which screens out harmful UV radiation from the sun. Efforts to do that under the Montreal Protocol have really been perhaps the single most successful international environmental treaty making effort that we have seen. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about why it's been so successful and why that has translated into this very recent, late ability to get environmental legislation and environmental treaties ratified through the United States, even as the United States has been pulling back from that. So as I said, the Montreal Protocol is the treaty-making effort that governs the control of ozone-depleting substances. The ozone layer is that layer that screens out harmful UV radiation. And unfortunately, I am going to have to talk about a mess of different chemicals with acronym names. And so I'm going to try to keep them color-coded. So first off, we have CFCs. Those are sort of the original ozone-depleting substances. They're very bad for the ozone layer. It stands for chlorofluorocarbons. We also have HCFCs, which are hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and those deplete the ozone layer, but at a substantially lower rate. So they maybe have like 5 to 10% of the ozone depleting potential of CFCs on a pound for pound basis. Finally, in the sort of original set of chemicals, we have HFCs. Those are hydrofluorocarbons, and those don't deplete the ozone layer. So during the 80s and 90s, when we were negotiating around ozone depletion, those were viewed as the good substitutes, the full substitutes. CFCs were really bad. Shifting from CFCs to HCFCs improved things, but did not create a perfect situation. HFCs were the sort of full solution to the problem. The problem with HFCs is that they do cause global warming. They're actually very potent global warming gases. And so what we have very recently seen in the last 5 years with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol is the phasing out of HFCs. We are still using this ozone depletion treaty-making effort to govern these HFCs, although they themselves are not ozone-depleting substances. But we're still using the Montreal Protocol process to phase those out because it was the Montreal Protocol process that kind of pushed them into the economy in the first place. And so what we are trying to replace them with now, and what the Kigali Amendment asks folks to do, is to shift to a fourth class of chemicals, HFOs, which don't deplete the ozone layer and also don't cause global warming. And I want to just go back to the late 80s and early 90s when we were first negotiating around ozone depleting substances, because there's this really interesting story. There are really kind of a fairly small set of key players in this area of pollution at the time that this negotiation first began. And there's a couple more than I'm putting on screen, but you can really understand a lot of the dynamics of the negotiations by understanding what was going on with these three countries, the US, the UK, and France. And that's because those were the three countries that had the largest producers of these ozone depleting substances. So those three countries were the ones that you most needed to get on board in order to solve the problem at the time. And those countries, in turn, had a set of corporations that were sort of heading their production of these chemicals, and which had a lot of influence on the government positions that were taken in the international negotiations at various points. So we have DuPont in the US, we have ICI in the UK, and we have Atochem in France. And what's really interesting to me about this is that these three companies took different strategies when they first began to see that they might need to reduce their use of CFCs. Remember, I talked about how there are these full substitutes, HFCs, and these partial substitutes, HCFCs. And so the three companies involved here took different strategies. ICI in the UK happened to have some really good technology for making HFCs. So they just went straight for HFCs. They didn't worry about these partial substitutes. Meanwhile, the USA, DuPont decided to go sort of down both pathways. They both started developing HFCs, and they also stuck with some of those partial substitutes, the HCFCs, but they were really phasing out the CFCs pretty much entirely. And then finally, France, Atochem was sort of the laggard. They were, even at the beginning of the negotiating process, they were still trying to hang on to those CFCs. And to the extent that they were investing in substitutes, they were really sticking to those partial substitutes, which were the easiest of the potential alternatives to make. And so you see this very interesting interweaving between what companies were doing and the national positions that these countries were taking. So I've noted 1987 and 1990 because those are two rounds of treaty making. So the 1987 round produced the original Montreal Protocol, which created moderate controls on these substances. 1990 was the first amendment year, which ratcheted down substantially the amount of these chemicals that were allowed to be made. And then there is a final round, 1992, that is sort of the final round of the original negotiations where they further ratcheted down what was allowable. And what's interesting here is that you can really see the strategies that the corporations took reflected in the national positions. So USA, DuPont goes sort of splits the difference. It goes both for full and partial substitutes. And in the US, you can kind of see the negotiating position reflect that. So the US says, okay, from the start, we're interested in just getting rid of CFCs. By 1992, however, we are no longer what we were originally, which is the leader on losing these. We still want to lose CFCs, but we want to keep HCFCs because our corporation invested in them. Meanwhile, in the UK, which did not invest in HCFCs, they initially, as their company starts to invest further and further in these full substitutes, these HFCs, they first begin to support the reduction of CFCs, but then pretty quickly by the last round of the negotiation, they're actually arguing to get rid of both CFCs and those partial substitutes, HCFCs. And finally, in France, because it was moving the slowest, its corporation was moving the slowest, was arguing quite late to still keep CFCs. And then by 1992, they were sort of converging with the United States, saying, okay, fine, we can get rid of CFCs, but we do definitely want to keep HCFCs because we've invested in them. And when I say that we've invested in them, I mean really literal big investments. These companies were building production facilities to make these chemicals. So DuPont was building factories to make both HFCs and HCFCs. Adochem in France was building factories to make HCFCs and only very later to make HFCs. And they were retaining assets to make CFCs until quite late. And ICI in the UK, right from the start, it was building facilities to make these full substitutes. So the case that I'm trying to build here is that as these companies began to see the first rounds of regulations, they responded to them. And moreover, they responded in different ways. Uh, DuPont took a kind of mixed strategy. UK, ICI took a very strong full substitute strategy, and France was the laggard. And the investments that they made around those became the basis for the positions that that national governments took in later rounds of negotiation. Essentially, those investments in important, expensive production facilities were creating sticky interests because the companies then wanted to defend those investments. So once you see a company start to build a factory to make make HCFCs or to make HFCs, those full substitutes, what you started seeing was these companies went from arguing against regulation to actually arguing for regulation because they wanted that market for those new chemicals. So what I would argue is that the ozone negotiation process and the different rounds of increasingly stringent regulation triggered this positive feedback loop that I call a green spiral. So initial rounds of negotiation caused companies to make initial facility investments. Those facility investments made them go back to national governments and say, okay, actually, we can take more regulation, which meant that the national governments in the next round of negotiation negotiated more stringent regulation, and the process repeated as more and more facilities around these new regulations were built. So, bringing us back to the present day, why did John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, Republicans being generally the party that's polarized against regulation around the environment in the US today, and Louisiana in particular being a state not known for its environmental regulation, why did John Kennedy support international environmental regulation of these HFCs? Because as I said, the most recent round, Kigali Amendment, is actually saying, okay, all those HFCs that we pushed you to use to get rid of CFCs and HCFCs, the problem chemicals and their partial substitutes, now we're going to phase out those HFCs as well. And we're going to bring in HFOs. And the answer to that is that one of the first big HFO plants was built in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So as companies are starting to see that there's a potential for another round of regulation to come down the line, some companies are strategically investing, and those companies and the governments that they sit within become more supportive of regulation. And that's why you can get this somewhat surprising outcome where a Republican senator in the United States from Louisiana will sponsor an act to reduce these chemicals and cooperate in getting the amendment itself ratified through the Senate. There's a couple of things I want to point out about this. First off, the manufacturers of ozone-depleting substances were what I call convertible industries, by which I mean initially they manufactured the pollutant, but they were equally capable of manufacturing the non-polluting substitute. So there wasn't any need to basically destroy that industry or those companies. They could just switch. It took investment. It wasn't completely easy, but it was a switch that they could make and still be competitive, productive companies. And so what does all this mean for climate change? Why did I take this big detour? What I want to argue is that this is a thing we can generalize to international environmental regulation. You really have to think about, in order to embed this kind of regulation, in order to make sure that it survives into the future and that it is possible to increasingly ratchet up the stringency of that, you need to have these kinds of processes. You need to make sure that there is this kind of positive feedback loop happening where initial, early, more moderate rounds of regulation create the industries that will thrive from further regulation and in a more regulated environment. And there's a couple of industries that I think are particularly good targets within climate. So vehicles, for instance, corporations that manufacture vehicles, uh, traditionally have manufactured internal combustion engine vehicles, but they are still capable of manufacturing electric vehicles. So that's a case of a convertible industry within climate change. And you are seeing some early rounds of that in the United States. You are seeing companies like Ford say, look, we've invested in this technology. We would actually prefer you not to just roll back the regulations around electric vehicles. Similarly, electric utilities. You can get an electric utility to invest in a bunch of generation assets that are fossil fuel based, or you can get an electric utility to invest in generation assets that are renewable. And once you've gotten them to invest in those renewable generation assets, they want to recoup that investment. They want to keep using those assets. They want a regulatory environment that allows them to do that. So I think there are some interesting questions that arise out of all of this. I'm just really interested in why some people, some companies, some governments do choose to combat climate change or other environmental problems while others don't. I'm very interested in sort of what the effective ways in which we can change what powerful interests want are. Like, how do we take companies and say, okay, you don't want regulation. How can we make you a company that sees that it has an interest in regulation? How do these dynamics change as the international context changes? For instance, with big shifts in the political landscape. And are there philosophical implications or ethical implications of focusing policy on changing interests? So I'm going to say that there are a variety of things that I think go into this. I think in terms of who chooses to do this initially, has to do with starting conditions. Just did you start out with a lot of fossil fuels or not, for instance? It has to do with perceived opportunities. So are you like ICI in the UK? Do you think you have a particularly good process technology for a non-polluting substitute that you want to pursue? Leadership also matters. Persuasion matters. So I think there's a lot of things that go into this. And when it comes to specifically changing interests, I think we should think about targeting. In particular, I think it's easier to convert existing industries than it is to build entirely new industries. And I think that typically you want a mix of policy types. You need economists will tell you that we should be reducing pollutants through pricing, market-based mechanisms. I think that's true, but I think also sometimes you need regulation and positive incentives because those can sometimes change interests in a way that pricing tends not to. So um, we can also think about this internationally. I think there's a lot of stuff going on out there that specifically generalizes to the international stage, but I've been talking at you a lot, so I'm going to wrap up now and say thank you. And again, note my email, ninakelsey@gwu.edu. Please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Professor Kelsey. That was really very interesting. And I learned a lot actually through this session as well. And what I'd love to do is just pose one question for you right now. I know we have many questions for you, which we're going to save to the end, but I think one's really interesting from Lavanya. And that is, what inspired you to dedicate your work to climate solutions? And what keeps you motivated during setbacks?
The first question, the short answer is I wasn't originally. I actually was raised by a mother from San Francisco, who grew up in San Francisco in the 1960s, and I never know quite how much American culture is something people are aware of, but like that was the center of the 1960s flower power hippie movement, and that was my mom, and she was very into environmental stuff, and I was always kind of like environmental. Um, but you know, in grad school, I had an advisor who happened to have a bunch of connections to the Danish government just when Denmark was hosting the 2009 round of climate negotiations. So he pulled me in, and I just got really interested in it. It's a critical problem for our world today. And I couldn't resist. I learned that my mom maybe was a little bit right. And I'm sorry, I think there was a second part to that question that I didn't
Yeah,
answer.
there was. So what keeps you motivated during all of these setbacks?
Oh, okay. So this is something I think about a lot because what I like to emphasize to people is that we've made a huge amount of progress, and I don't think that gets talked about enough. When we sort of started this, the business as usual projections for where we were going in terms of global warming by the end of the century were like 6 degrees Celsius. And now what we're looking at is if you take all of the pledges that people have made, for instance, under the Paris Agreement, and you assume they get executed, they're not good enough yet. We need to keep pushing. But if you assume that we just execute those and we continue to see the trends in things like pricing decreases for renewable energy that we have seen, we're probably looking at something more like 2.5 to 3 degrees C. So we've already cut in half what we think we are likely to end up with. And that's if we do nothing more. And I don't, like I say, I want us to do a lot more. I want us to get it down to 2 degrees or maybe even 1.5. We're probably going to need some carbon capture to get to 1.5, maybe possibly people are thinking about the possibility of light geoengineering. But I think it's doable. I think we get a lot of messaging that says the next 10 years are critical. We're in a crisis. We're all going to die. And I get why people want to motivate people. It is important that we move as fast as we can on this because every fraction of a degree better is lives saved, homes saved, property saved. But at the same time, it's also there's not a single threshold. Every fraction of a degree is lives saved, homes saved, property saved. And we have already made a lot of progress. So.
Great, thank you. I'm going to invite our next speaker also oh, there you are, Danielle. So I'm going to invite Danielle Goldstein to share her screen and present a little bit more about the Elliott School of International Affairs, because I know there's been a lot of questions about admissions, who should be entering this as well. And I know, Danielle, you'll be able to share. And we also have many questions, both for Danielle and for Dr. Kelsey, that we'll share at the end as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Danielle.
Wonderful, thank you. So hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Goldstein. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Admissions here at the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Kelsey's session today and can see yourself taking a class with her as an Elliott School student. So I'm excited to provide you with some more information about our school and how you can go about becoming a student here. So I'll start off by talking about the options that you have in terms of the programs we offer. The Elliott School offers 8 Master of Arts programs, 2 specialized master's degrees, and 2 joint degree options. And then we're also very excited to be offering a brand new STEM designated accelerated MS in International Economic Policy that only takes about 1.5 years to complete. All of our programs are interdisciplinary and cover a wide range of topics. Each program offers anywhere between 4 and over 15 concentrations that students can choose from. And then some programs allow our students to choose multiple concentrations or even create your own. So I saw a lot of questions coming in the Q&A about which program should I do if I'm interested in X or Y topic. So just know that you have a ton of flexibility in all of our programs to customize the program for your specific interests. Here are a few of the strongest features of our school that you'll find across all of our programs and that all contribute to the value of your Elliott School degree. One of the biggest keys to our entire student experience framework is the flexibility that's built into your degree program. So we offer both a fall start, which begins in August, and a spring start, which begins in January. That means you can really start the program when the timing is right for you. Next, I'll highlight why all of our courses are held in the evenings. So our programs were built with students' best professional interests in mind. We wanted to allow students to take advantage of our unique location. Since all of our courses begin at about 5 p.m. or later, students have the opportunity to work, hold an internship, or volunteer during the day, and then make it to campus for class in the evening pretty easily. Next, the capstone experience is probably going to be one of the most memorable and impactful parts of all of your studies because of how it brings together everything that you've learned throughout the course of your time in your program and applies it in a hands-on real-world scenario. The capstone course is going to be completed over 2 consecutive semesters. You'll sign up for a class that's based on a thematic topic. So that might be something like foreign policy or international security. You'll form small groups of around 3 or 4 students and formulate a research proposal. And then you have the option to work with an outside client to determine deliverables. The skills that you develop through this process and by completing the final research paper and presentation components of the capstone prepare you for employment immediately after graduation and allow you to put a real-world consultancy on your resume before you even graduate. And then another favorite element that all of our programs share is our skills courses. These courses are built around feedback that our Graduate Student Services Office receives from surveys that they send to domestic and international employers. These courses allow students to stay up to date on the skills that employers are looking for in competitive candidates for careers and internships. So, as you've probably already discovered, if you're looking into a master's program, a graduate education of the caliber that you'll get at the Elliott School is a significant investment. So I'm sure you have questions about fellowship opportunities and other ways to reduce your tuition expenses. So here you can see the deadlines by which you'll need to submit your application in order to be considered for Elliott School fellowships. So if you're applying for our fall term, which starts in late August, you'll want to submit your application by January 7th at the latest, or you can submit it by November 1st if you want to find out your decision early. If you're applying for the spring semester, which starts in January every year, you'll want to submit your application by October 1st. And all you need to do is submit your application and all of your materials by these deadlines and indicate on your application that you want to be considered for fellowships, and we will automatically consider you. Now, these Elliott School fellowships are partial tuition scholarships, typically cover between $2,000 and $10,000 of your tuition each semester. Because our Elliott School fellowships only cover part of your tuition, we always really highly encourage you to look at additional fellowship opportunities. So first off, housed centrally within GW is the Office of Graduate Student Assistantships and Fellowships, and they offer additional fellowship opportunities that you can look into. These do require separate applications and they all have different deadlines. So as you're exploring those options, just make sure you take a note of the different deadlines and requirements for these different scholarships. And then you can also find a lot of scholarships and resources outside of GW. So you might be familiar with some prominent fellowship opportunities like Fulbright, but there are tons of other opportunities out there as well that are worth looking into. So a great resource for scholarships in the field of international affairs specifically is APSIA. This is the Association for Professional Schools of International Affairs. Their website offers an extensive directory of fellowship opportunities, so it's a great resource to look into some other ways to save money on your tuition. And then finally, we really do our best to provide a wide variety of graduate school funding options on our website, which I have linked here. So make sure you review all of the resources available to you so that you have a really broad understanding of the ways that you might be able to reduce the cost of your education. Okay, just to quickly go over the application prerequisites and required materials, you can find a ton more information about these requirements on our website, and we're always happy to answer more questions via email. So the first thing to note is that some of our programs have some prerequisites and some have none at all. Some of our MA programs have prerequisites in either foreign language, economics, or both. We also have a calculus prerequisite for one of our programs. So again, more information about what those prerequisites are for each program and how you can fulfill them is available on our website. Now, in terms of the application itself, you'll need to fill out the application online. You will receive an application fee waiver for attending this info session. So when the application asks you if you have a fee waiver code, select yes, and then enter the code you see here, which is in all capital letters, ESIA SEED 2025. You'll also need to submit a resume or a CV and a statement of purpose. There are 2 prompts to choose from for your statement of purpose. We require 2 letters of recommendation, and we generally ask that you submit 1 academic reference and 1 professional reference. We require transcripts from all institutions that you've attended, as well as translations of those transcripts if they're not in English. Your bachelor's degree must be equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree. So typically we do evaluate most transcripts in-house, But if we're unable to determine that your degree is equivalent to a US 4-year bachelor's degree, you might be required to provide a course-by-course credential evaluation by a company like WES or ECE. And in terms of GPA, we don't have a minimum GPA required for admission as we review applications holistically. But just to give you a sense, our average GPA last year for incoming students was about a 3.6 on a 4.0 scale. In terms of standardized test scores, most of our programs are test blind, which means that we do not accept GRE scores at all, but we do have two programs that are test optional. None of our programs require the GRE, so you are never going to be required to submit GRE scores if you don't want to. And then finally, international students are required to submit English language test scores. We accept TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, and Duolingo. And here I just have listed the minimum score requirements for English language tests, depending on the term that you're applying for. And again, you can find this information on our website as well. Okay, so I know we're going to get into some questions, but just in case I don't answer your questions today, or if you think of any more questions in the days ahead, please feel free to send us an email. The admissions email for the Elliott School Grad Admissions Office is esiagrad@gw.edu. Always happy to answer your questions. We also would love for you to attend a virtual information session where we go into a lot more depth about our programs, the opportunities and supports available to our students, and much more that the Elliott School has to offer. Generally, we host a few virtual information sessions each month, but we also have an upcoming virtual open house that's taking place on October 29th. And that's an amazing opportunity to actually interact directly with our program directors for all of our programs. So Professor Kelsey will be there, as well as all of our other program directors. And for some of you asking some of those questions, like which program should I choose if this is my interest, the virtual open house is a great place to go to ask those questions directly to the program directors. So you can sign up for an upcoming information session or for that virtual open house by either clicking that link or going to the QR code there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Actually, a lot of our questions have been answered as you were presenting because it was very thorough. Lots of great information. I'm going to invite Professor Kelsey also back on camera because we have a few questions for both of you. And I'll start, I guess, Danielle, now that you're on screen. If you can expand, or perhaps both of you, what kinds of student communities or clubs are active for international students, particularly those interested in environmental issues, global policy, or social impact?
Yeah, I can kind of start a bit broadly, and then Professor Kelsey, if you have any more specifics, feel free to jump in. So there are a ton of student organizations at GW. Some of them are specifically within the Elliott School, and some of them are a bit more broad and cover all of GW. And you're able to join any or all of those student orgs. I think we are a school that has one of the highest numbers of student organizations in the US. So definitely a lot of ways to get involved. In terms of specific groups, what I can do is share a couple of links either in the chat or in the Q&A of places that you can look around to see how you might get involved. Like I said, there are hundreds of student orgs, and lots of them are related to advocacy over a number of different topics. So I'll share those resources, but Dr. Kelsey, I don't know if you have anything more specific on that.
No, I don't have a lot of more specific things. One thing I would just say is that we do have a fair number of international students here at Elliott, and of course, all of our students are interested in international affairs. So I think you will see both participation from international students and interest in international topics in almost any student org that's run out of the Elliott School. And I will say there's also a lot of stuff here at Elliott and at GW generally that is focusing on areas of science and technology policy. So for instance, I would check out the Alliance for a Sustainable Future, which is a campus-wide organization. It's not just students, it's also faculty, graduate students, et cetera. And that's a place where we try to pull together a lot of sustainability related stuff. Here at the ISTP, the Institute for International Science and Technology policy. Because we have a particular strength in space policy, there's a space policy student group. And you'll see a lot of those types of like smaller student interest groups. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I'll just, we have a lot of questions. So if there's a few that you both prefer to answer in the chat, please feel free to do so. But I see that one that's upvoted here. We've talked a lot about the macro level, but can efforts at an individual level help in any way or make any change? And I'll pose that to Dr. Kelsey.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to start out actually by relating this to another question I see just below that from Apurva Shende. Is there a way we can alter or modify the ideation or communication about climate change to help with getting bipartisan support for legislation? Because I view these two things as very interconnected. So first off, I think it is useful and important to do individual level things. Try to buy less plastics, try to reduce your own energy consumption. That'll also save you money usually, so that's good. Uh, of course, realistically, no one person is going to change the entire carbon emissions of the world, sadly. But the thing about doing those kinds of individual level things is that you do change ideation when you do them. When you show your community and the people around you that this is important to you, that builds up a culture that these are important things to do and care about, not just at the individual level, but also at the sort of broader level, right? A person who is in a culture that says it's good to conserve energy, it's good to recycle, it's good to use less plastic, is going to be a person that expects policy that also reinforces those things.
Great. And while we're on the topic of making change, Nishi has posed, how can someone build a career in corporate reform, contributing to the ethical and social change within companies without being an activist, but rather working from the inside to implement and support reform initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Well, so the most basic answer to that is like I say, just be a part of a culture that cares about these things. Any person working in any business job will usually have the ability to make some choices, particularly as you move up in your career and perhaps become a manager or somebody that makes more strategic decisions. You have the opportunity to keep those kinds of things in mind and to push for that in your corporate culture. So any job can be a job like that. Um, I am a big believer in working from the inside. I think that historically, like revolutions are pretty dangerous. They often do as much harm as good. And so I'm a big believer in saying, hey, let's look at the system as it is and make it better, not try to knock it down to the ground and rebuild something. So I'm a big believer in that. I will say that you don't usually get a lot of movement purely from corporations and companies unless it's technologically based. So another answer to your question is you could be involved in technology policy, or you could be involved in technology work within a corporation. You could be trying to create the next big technology in some area. You could be working on that. Because technologies are very responsive to the economics incentives they face. So if they come up with a new technology, then they'll both want to sell that technology, and also they might want regulation that would support that technology and provide subsidies for it. So that's another thing. And then certainly there are jobs in corporations that are formally focused on things like sustainability. I think that's, at least in the United States, it's maybe not in its highest peak right now. But on the other hand, I certainly don't think all corporations are stepping back from that for a variety of reasons. And I think looking to see whether a corporation is doing that can tell you something about that corporate culture, given that they're not at this point just doing it because it's the new sexy thing.
Thanks. And you touched on technology, and there's been a few questions in the Q&A around technology. First is, what emerging technologies show the most promise for scaling up climate solutions in the next 5 to 10 years, and what barriers prevent their widespread adoption?
Okay, so this is an off-the-cuff answer. I might think about it for 10 hours and come back with different answers, but off the cuff, I would say three things. The sort of sexy, slightly out of left field answer is geothermal. I think people are in a moment right now where they're realizing that we haven't done a lot with geothermal, and it's actually a great renewable if it's something that is viable in your area, because it provides what we call baseload power. So by that, I mean, it's always on. Whereas solar and wind have the problem of being intermittent, right? You need the sun to be shining or the wind to be blowing, or you need to add on the extra expense of storage devices to capture that so that you can use it when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And geothermal is, in some ways, I think it could be the next hydropower, right? Hydro is also great for this. Once you create a hydro-powered facility, it just, as long as there's water, which could be a separate issue, but as long as there is water, you can be harvesting power from that water, and it's not creating carbon. So geothermal. I will also say that although it's a little more of an increasingly mature technology, solar is just still incredibly important. Getting the efficiency of solar panels up technologically and bringing the cost of solar down, and also solving problems around rare earth metals, which are actually fairly widely distributed on the earth, but they are really nasty to mine. They're very bad for local communities. And so I think any technological advances that could do something about that, you would be doing real good in the world. And then finally, I will say, let's say EV and EV battery technology. China is just eating everyone else's lunch, and that's partly because they've been innovative with low-cost EV battery technology. Again, batteries are expensive, so things that can bring down the cost are great. And I guess that's the last thing I would say, just as an overarching comment. A lot of the future of climate change mitigation is going to happen in the developing world, and the big transitioning economies like China and India. And cost really matters there. So I think to some degree, it's nice to find the sexy new technology, but it's also great to find a sexy new way of making an existing technology a lot cheaper.
Great, thank you. And I know we've spoken a bit about technology, but also backgrounds coming into the program. So there's a lot of questions about, what if I'm coming from a tech background? What if I'm coming from an agriculture background? So this is sort of a two-part question. First, from Danielle, on the admission standpoint, how do applicants from diverse backgrounds mold their application to be competitive and admissible? And then the second question is then for Dr. Kelsey, how do students from diverse backgrounds like agriculture and tech create a career in this field? So I'll start with Danielle.
Great. We love applicants that come from diverse backgrounds. Sometimes folks ask us what the ideal applicant is, and there really is no answer to that question, because the ideal applicant is someone who shows us something different or something new, or a way that they're going to contribute their background, their expertise, their interests to the program in a unique way. So not only are we here to serve you and teach you, but you are going to contribute to your classes. You're going to teach your classmates and contribute to classroom conversations and to your assignments based on your unique background and perspective. So essentially, as long as you fulfill the prerequisites for any of our programs, you can come from any background. We don't require that you have any specific major in undergrad. We don't have a specific work experience requirement except for our one mid-career program. And so we really value students coming from all sorts of backgrounds. And then in terms of how to kind of come across in your application in a way that's compelling, I would say the main thing to focus on for the admissions folks is your statement of purpose. So that's the place where you can really paint the picture for us of what is your background, what are your areas of interest, and what is it about the Elliott School and this program specifically that's going to allow you to bring your expertise, study what you want to study, and then get to your dream career after you graduate. So I would say statement of purpose is a great place to highlight any sort of diverse experiences in your application.
Okay. So I'm going to answer this largely from the perspective of the International Science and Technology Policy Masters, just because that's the one that I direct. I think there are some similar answers for a lot of our other programs as well. So I will say that we get students from a variety of backgrounds, and so that's something that the program is adapted for. In particular, I would say we sort of think of our students as coming in broadly from two directions. We get students that have some kind of substantive or policy knowledge, and want to learn more about the tech side of things because they want to work at that tech policy intersection. Or we get people who are coming in from the tech side of things, like they did a master's in or an undergraduate engineering degree or something, and they're interested in going into the policy that governs that, and so they want to get the policy side of things. So the program can work for either of those things. It's just going to be a question of how you use your electives. And I will say that as a relatively small program, we can be pretty high touch with our students. We can do a lot of sort of one-on-one work with you. So we have some pre-designed concentration fields. And if one of those fits you, you can just do it, right? Just go on the website, take those courses, done, nothing more to think about. But if there's something you want to do that's a little bit different, or if you see a particular hole that you'd like to fill in terms of what you're knowledgeable about, and you want to design your own concentration, that is also absolutely something we do. We have the sort of ability to be flexible with our relatively small program of students. And let me see, I actually took a couple notes on the things I wanted to say about this because it's a great question. Oh, and two just practical points. One is that if you are somebody who comes in knowing you're sort of good at one thing but not as good at another thing, GW is a great place to just do a master's because we really do have a very wide range of schools here on the same campus, open to our students to take classes there. So if you want to get a little bit of law, you can take classes at our law school. If you want to get a little bit of business courses, you can take some business courses at our business school. If you want to shore up your knowledge of the technology or engineering side of things, we have a School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. We have a public health school. We have a public policy school. We have a School of Media and Public Affairs. So if you're interested in sort of the communication or ideation side of things, you might want to take a course over there. So just a lot of resources here. And then the final thing I will say is just sort of echo some of what Danielle said about the application essay as a place to communicate where you're coming from. So the one thing I would say about diverse backgrounds is if I see a student that's coming in from a radically different area, like if you're a modern art major and you want to go into science and tech policy, it would be useful for me to hear in your application essay just a little bit about sort of what's driving that. What's the underlying story that connects those things for you? I've had some of our loveliest students that I've had the most fun with kind of come from an off-the-wall background, but it's useful to us to hear sort of what that story is in your head.
Thank you. I've got another great question from Kushi, who speaks a bit about the Montreal Protocol and the positive feedback loop and DuPont's move to HFCs. But what about AI? Now we've got the dual impact of AI. It's high energy consumption, but alongside its powerful optimization capabilities. What are the specific immediate policy mechanisms that governments should implement to force AI companies to rapidly green their data centers?
Oh, such a good question. Yes, AI is the big new thing. And I didn't mention it in my earlier area because my earlier question about sort of big new technologies, because it feels to me like it's this big thing that's barging into the climate and sustainability world from the outside. Um, okay, but to answer your question, I actually wrote a paper recently with a good friend of mine that basically said we have lived in a world for a long time where governments had to balance economic and security drivers when making particularly international facing policy. So a classic example is semiconductors, right? You need to think about both the economic implications of being able to get semiconductor technology from abroad and sell your semiconductor technology abroad, but also you need to think about the security implications of making sure that you're not stuck with no ability to manufacture your own semiconductors, too reliant on a government that may or may not be friendly to you, et cetera. But the argument that we made is increasingly you're seeing the rise of what we called fulcrum technologies. And these are technologies that do have that security aspect. They have economic aspect, but they also have a resource or sustainability aspect. So for instance, with semiconductors, you've got security, you've got economics, but increasingly we are realizing that semiconductors are really resource intensive to manufacture in some ways. They take a lot of water, for instance. And so in the United States, we've seen moves to bring semiconductor manufacturing onshore, but it's often going to places like Arizona and Texas that are very not well supplied with water. And so it would be better for us to make policy that takes into account all three things at once, rather than just focusing on one or two of those things and letting the others fall where they may. And so at a very broad level, I would say it's necessary for government to try to figure out how to make policy that starts with all three of those things and not just one or two of them. So that's like a really broad answer. We need to come up with better processes for making policy that takes into account all three of those aspects. And that's very, very true of AI. At a more specific level, the interesting thing about AI is it's from an environmental perspective, its costs are sort of one or two big things. It's going to take a lot of power and it's going to take a lot of water. Its benefits are extremely fragmented, right? There are lots of ways in which we can imagine that AI will help us to, for instance, help research technologies, help better optimize systems. And it's kind of, in some ways, I think that's more certain because a lot of those fragmented applications are just better ways of doing things we're already trying to do. Whereas it's hard to say exactly what the power needs of AI are going to be in the next 10, let alone 50 years, because chips are changing fast. Technology for generating power is changing fast. And so on the one hand, you've got costs, which are big but uncertain, and you've got benefits, which are fairly certain in many cases, but fragmented and hard to wrap around in one policy. And I think that's going to be really difficult for governments to engage with. I think it's going to be really difficult for them to sort of both think about the one big potential cost and then balance that with all of the lots of little smaller scale, but many applications that can help us with environmental problems. And then I guess the one other thing I would say about that is I think we really need to think hard about how to solve the problem of the hollowing out of the middle of expertise. And what I mean by that is in the current world, you have people who start in a field and they just increasingly get good in that field. They become more and more expert. And eventually, when they reach the top of the field, they're the people who are training the AI to do things. I was talking with somebody who focuses on using AI to evaluate drone footage to look for instances of environmental misbehavior on the high seas. You can send out drones, but to patrol the entire ocean, it's a huge amount of footage. It would be very difficult to have humans review all that footage. So it's great to have AI that can go through and figure out, okay, that boat looks like it's doing something we don't like. It's discharging oil or overfishing or what have you. But that's something that it takes some expertise to determine. And so we can train an AI to do it. That's very much the kind of thing that AI can learn to do, pattern recognition of various kinds. But it needs an expert to teach it how to do it. And it needs an expert to constantly be monitoring it as conditions change and making sure that it adapts as the world adapts and so forth. But the problem is the experts who have learned how to spot misbehavior on the high seas learned that by doing their own looking at things for a long time. And so if we're replacing those people with a bunch of non-experts who have simply been trained to respond to what the AI gives them, then we're destroying the human capital development chain that leads to the people who can teach the AI to do these things. And that's something I think we're just really going to need to struggle with. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I see there's a lot of passionate potential students here asking a lot of great questions. I know we're a little bit over time, so I'm just going to pose one more to either of you. And also, while I'm doing so, it would be great if you both have shared your email already and any emails to contact the school moving forward. If you could share that in the chat, because I know that for the 10 or so questions we won't get to, perhaps they can reach out to the school directly thereafter. So my final question for everyone after this really interesting discussion is, we've talked a little bit about school groups and student groups and organizations, but let's flip over to mentorship and networking within industry. So what kind of mentorship or networking opportunities are provided to help students connect with industry leaders?
Do you want to take this one, Professor Kelsey? Do you want me to?
So I think we should, so there's kind of two levels at which this happens, right? There's the Elliott Career Services Office,
Yes.
and there's the individual programs and the expertise that the professors have. So I'll talk about the second of those.
Perfect.
Essentially, each of your programs that you might apply to are made up of professors, and not just academic professors, but we have a lot of professors of practice, people who came out of, say, the policy world or the corporate world, that now want to kind of move into teaching and telling people about the areas that they're experts in. So there's a lot of networking that happens between the professors and the outside world. Many of the professors have either been in policy, or they have moved in and out of policy, or they haven't been in policy themselves, but they've worked with policy people to answer questions. And that is kind of the benefit that we can give you at the program level, right? There's a good chance that we might know someone, maybe somebody who doesn't have a job themselves, although they might, but somebody that you could go get coffee with and just talk about what they do. And then they know that you're a person who's out there interested in this world. They can tell you who to talk to next. So the programs are really a center of networking for you. And I have a whole speech that I give students about how to network. It's not easy for a lot of people. I'm one of them. I'm actually a bit shy in situations with new people. And so I can talk to people about how to network if it's a little bit challenging.
And then I can talk about the graduate student services side of things. So a really fantastic support resource that you'll have here as a student is our graduate student services office. This is an office that is comprised of academic advising, graduate career services, and international and global experiential education. So this is kind of a one-stop shop for all of the resources that you're going to need as a grad student. And because they're all in the same office, they work really collaboratively to support you kind of in a wraparound basis as a student. So focusing on the career development side of things, you will have an assigned career coach that you can start working with a few months before you start your program. You'll work with them all throughout your program. And then this is also a lifelong resource. So you can continue working with them after you graduate for the rest of your entire life. There are tons of resources that they offer. You can have one-on-one meetings with your career coach to go through your resume or cover letter, to talk about networking strategies and tips. You can do mock interviews with them. They also host workshops on things like resume development and kind of various career paths that you might consider. And then they do a lot of kind of off-site activities as well. So they host site visit programs either around the Washington, D.C. area, or every spring they host a career trek to a different city. And they spend the whole week in meetings with potential organizations that they might work for, meeting with alumni who work at some of those organizations, shadowing folks who do some of the work that they're interested in. So really immersing you in a ton of different places that you could go on to build your career. They also have networking sessions. So lots of opportunities available there. Our career services office is an absolutely fantastic resource. They're always coming up with new and exciting ways to support our students. So I will say definitely take a look at our website to find more about that. But it is kind of unimaginable the amount of support that they provide our students.
Amazing. Thank you. Oh, Professor Kelsey, want to add something?
Because I think we're winding down. So I just wanted to say I have been like scanning through the Q&A section here, and so many great questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, and I just wanted to acknowledge that because I'm just seeing a lot of sophistication here, people who have really insightful questions that clearly already know something about this area. And so I'm really sorry that we didn't get to all of your questions, and I really just do want to emphasize, if anyone would like to chat, please don't hesitate to email me at that, ninakelsey@gwu.edu. I definitely, none of us didn't answer your questions because we didn't think they were interesting or important. We just had limited time. So please don't hesitate.
Thank you. That's great. And amazing questions. I'm looking at them and quite a volume of them as well. So a lot of interested students, because this is a very interesting topic. And also at the Elliott School of International Affairs, it's clear that all of tomorrow's and today's challenges are being addressed at the school, and there's a lot of resources for you should you decide to join one of the master's programs offered there. So I just want to thank both Danielle and Professor Kelsey for their time today and for their great insights, and for all of you for joining us today with your fantastic questions. Please don't forget to keep in touch with our speakers with SEED. There's also an app fee waiver for those that have decided to come today who wish to apply in the future. That's ESIA SEED 2025. And we will be posting this session tomorrow if you want to dig in a little bit more and hear again all about the topics that we've spoken about. It will be on SEED Global Education's YouTube channel tomorrow. So thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.